Excel has a wealth of numeric formatting options. In this worksheet called Numeric, we can see that the data in columns J through Q on the right do have numeric entries with formats applied, dollar signs and commas. The data over in column F and G, however, isn't formatted. And two of the most common buttons that you'll use for formatting are available on the Home tab in the Number group. Let's first consider column F. Now, if you know that there's nothing else going into this column, and if you're familiar with your data pretty well, we might as well click the entire column and apply a format there. It's not going to disrupt any of the text entries that might appear as we see here in cell F1. And certainly a dollar sign is worth considering. The dollar sign actually means accounting number format. Let's make the option there. Since the word salary is there, do you really need the dollar signs? Well, it doesn't necessarily hurt, but you might not want to see the dollar signs. Now, if you've used other buttons in Excel, you might say, well, we'll just use the dollar sign to get rid of these. But this is not one of the so-called toggle buttons. If you prefer not to see the dollar sign, but you do want to see the commas, the alternate choice here is the comma button. And this is not really the opposite. In fact, it's almost the same, but it doesn't display the dollar sign. And so many times when working with financial data, if you don't want to see dollar signs in every single cell, this is the option you're likely to consider. And because those yearly salaries have no pennies in them, do we really want to see the pennies being displayed? And so the two buttons to the right that increase or decrease decimals should be considered. And of course, in this case, why not decrease the decimals? And that's a cleaner look, and we don't need to see those pennies being displayed. And by the way, do not mistake this button for changing the result. If there were pennies there, we would not be rounding the numbers really. We would be displaying visual rounding, but we wouldn't really be changing the content there. The data in column G also represents financial data, but there are negatives involved here. And let's approach this too and see what happens if we were to choose, first of all, dollar sign. How are those negatives going to be displayed? In parentheses, that's standard accounting format. Notice how there's spacing on the right to allow for the parenthesis when necessary. In other cases, it's a half space so that the decimals continue to line up. Now, this may be your preferred choice, but once again, maybe comma is a better choice if it's implied that these are dollars anyway. So you could take that approach. Behind the scenes, there are other formats worth considering. One option could be to simply click the dialog box launcher right here on the number group, and this activates the Format Cells dialog box. We are currently using accounting format here. Notice that there's a format called number. This gives us some different options for displaying negatives. Sometimes that's important. If you want those negatives to stand out more prominently, perhaps have the negatives appear, as we see it here, in red. Once again, we can get back into that dialog box with this button here. There's also a currency and accounting, and these are not the same, although they're very similar. And here, too, you've got greater control over what happens with the negatives. And something you wouldn't necessarily know at first, but you might want to bring out here. What if we choose currency here? Click OK. Now we will see dollar signs. What happens when I make the column wider? The dollar signs stay with the data. What if we were to choose the dollar sign here, which really means accounting format? The dollar signs are over on the left-hand side, and we see the data in parentheses. Now, the purpose here was not to confuse you, but to point out that there are different formats. And sometimes when you get data from other sources, the data might be using accounting format or currency format. And once again, when we click this button, it's up to you to decide which works best for you. What works best for me, I think it's a decent suggestion, is that work with the dollar sign and the comma as much as possible, and I hope you like them because then you don't have to go behind the scenes as often to do the fine-tuning that tends to take up time. So again, keep in mind there are different ways to display numerical data, financial data, with or without dollar signs. Also in this worksheet, recognize that column B has Social Security numbers in them, and they were not typed with hyphens. Well, why not? They could have been. Well, it's more typing involved. And a nice feature in Excel is that if you select these cells and then go to the Format Cells dialog box, now we can get there the same way we did before by clicking this button here, or possibly simply right-clicking in the column here and choosing Format Cells. And in the Format Cells dialog box, there's a category called Special. And there it is for Social Security number. So what we're about to see here is the hyphens being displayed. Now, they're not truly in the content. If you click one of these cells and look in the formula bar, you don't see the hyphens. If you're editing one of these, you don't type the hyphens. They will appear automatically. They're part of the format. And usually what's done in situations like this, the format is applied before the data even goes in. Now, you can certainly do it later, as I did here. And the same idea with phone numbers. Don't be typing extra characters if you don't need to. Format these cells. And again, it's more likely to work smoothly if you do this before you put in the data, but you can certainly do it after, as we're about to do here. I'm going to right-click column C, choose Format Cells, and in the Format Cells dialog box in the Number tab, here too, a special format for phone numbers. Click OK, and we see the entries being displayed this way. That's the standard way to display phone numbers. Here too, if you are editing one of these, if you happen to double-click here, you will not see the parentheses, the space, or the hyphen, and you don't type them either. You'll simply make a change here and there as necessary. Maybe that should have been a 7. You change that, enter, and the symbols appear there. So Excel has quite a few choices built in automatically to control the formatting of special kinds of numbers like phone numbers and Social Security numbers. And also, as we saw earlier, entries for dollar-type entries for salary, account balances. And we see similar displays over on the right in columns K, L, and M, etc. These are the kind of features you want to be able to get to quickly and easily. And again, the strong recommendation here is, as much as possible, use the buttons available in the number group, which is on the Home tab of the ribbon.